How's it going?
It's going well.
Shoot, I should have asked you that other question that I had about jiu-jitsu
You can
afterwards.
just surprise me, but if the answers are stupid, then it's I didn't have the answers before.
Oh, I was just curious that message you sent about thinking about with your brother and then wishing that, the observation like, oh, I hope people take care of my brother and then maybe I should treat people like my brother. I thought that was
Yeah,
pretty profound. And then it was interesting for me because that kid like kneed me in the face, right?
it's on my list of regrets. Like I see stuff about to happen, and then I was gonna say something, and then right before I said it, then it happened. It's happened like 10 times.
Nah, it was all good. But what I thought was kind of interesting about how he was training yesterday too was when he walked in, he's like, I haven't trained in like a year.
Mm.
And then I was kind of watching, and I watched when he inverted and went for the knee bar on me, and I
Yeah,
was like, "Wow, either you're like a prodigy, or you kind of like fudged the I haven't trained in a minute kind of thing."
he's
Yeah,
moving pretty well for not training for a year. Usually, the longer you go, then the things that you want to do, like your body just doesn't do it.
but it could be youth. I'm assuming he's probably a good 2 decades younger.
I think he is. Even
Yeah,
the other kid asked me what years I went to school, and I told him 99 to '03, and he said, "Oh wow, I was 1 years old when you went to school." It's like, thanks.
I had something like that happen to me recently. Actually, I just started a new job back at my old company.
Which company is that?
YK Hawaiian Volcanic Water. But one of my new colleagues, she's fresh out of college and she was telling me about where she's from. She grew up in Hilo as well. And it turns out that her brother was a student of one of my classmates. And that kind of just took me back because at this stage, I've been out of high school for a minute. I'm coming on 20 years out of college right now, too, which really blows my mind.
I am 20 years out of college. It hurts.
It just took me forever to graduate and decide upon a major. But people want to know who you are. Would you mind telling us a little bit about who you are?
Who am I? I'm all over the place. I do random stuff. I go to work. I train jujitsu. I'm trying to learn flamenco style guitar. I do some biohacking. I do starting strength program, and I try to get my deadlift over 400. And I try and think of stuff to eat every day, but I pretty much eat the same thing every day. That's about it.
That's interesting because actually biohacking was something I figured would come up, and you've over the years I've observed that you share some of the things that you do. What would be a simple recommendation that you would have for people on how to biohack or get into it?
Go out in the sun. It's free. If you live on the equator, even better. If you don't live where there's sun, then you need a UVB light, and you can like get a good one, but that sun exposure for your circadian rhythm. And I'm opposite because I was night shift for 12 years. And so it was like a constant battle to like not die on the bio side of it because you're basically working against yourself. And so that's why I spent so much time like trying to manipulate light, trying to do things that are good for me. You won't know if it's working until you're either alive or dead, right? If you're alive, it worked. If you die, then it didn't work. But that's why I
Yeah.
got into like a lot of the light manipulation and then like trying to get that sun exposure. And it's much easier if you're a nighttime sleeper. If you get that early morning sunlight, especially in your eyes, take a look up
Mhm.
at the sky, not into the sun, but up into the sky. When you wake up, not through a window, but out there, and that should help you with your circadian rhythm. Sunlight on bare skin, between 10 and 2 is ideal, 10, 15 minutes, depending on how fast you burn or more. And that's good for your vitamin D levels. I think biohacking wise, vitamin D is the easiest fix because that's the thing that most people are most deficient in. And vitamin D is really good for all your bone health and all of your other hormones, also overlooked, I think.
That's huge. Actually, one thing that I learned over the course of my life is that people here in the islands are actually very low on vitamin D as well, which is kind
Correct.
of surprising considering where we are near the equator and then in a tropical paradise, more or less, right?
Yeah, because if you're not consciously like getting that exposure on your skin during the right times of the day, then you're just going to be deficient. But it's super easy to supplement with if you take vitamin D with K2 under the care of a doctor, getting blood work, they say 10,000, and not under the care of a doctor, no blood work, 5,000 per day IU. And that's much, much higher than like a multivitamin. Multivitamins are like in the hundreds, right?
Mm. I just read this article this morning actually, and it was talking about how save your money. Like, don't go and just pound all these pills and different things. Like, if you really clean up your diet, that's really going to go a lot further than some of the things that people are putting in their bodies.
Yeah, I took one of the best supplements I think I took was like desiccated beef liver pills.
Hmm.
But it was about, I think, 30 or so a month. Beef liver, beef organs, they have a lot of vitamins in it. And probably the worst thing I took was like multivitamins because it's just a waste. You know, it has too little of what you need and too much of what you don't need.
What are your thoughts about ashwagandha?
I've taken it off and on. I like it. The patented KSM 66 is supposed to be really good for like stress relief, oxidative stress, and supposed to be good for your hormones and stuff. So I think the clinical dose is like 600 milligrams. Most supplements will give you that. Amazon has cheap ashwagandha. I think it's pretty good, but it's not something that I'm like I gotta take every day. So my gotta take, I narrowed it down like through the last 5 years. I narrowed it down to the gotta take supplements, and so actually right now we're on DHEA because that's another depleting hormone, and that's over the counter.
Mm.
I did try the Tomcat and the Fadoja. I like that one. Vitamin D with a K2. And right now I'm on some vitamin B because my last labs were a little high on the homocysteine. So that was the recommendation for that.
That's cool. Actually, I remember years back you shared something with ashwagandha, and this past year I started taking it, and I feel like it's helpful. So I've been in the process of taking 2 pills a day. I'm gonna run through my current bottle, and then I'll probably be off for a little while because I was reading, and I didn't know this actually, but technically with supplements, some of them can have long-term effects on you in a negative fashion. So you should probably take them off and on or cycle in and out.
I like to just get it when I think of it and then use it, But I think the best way is if you're interested in something, read about it, take it, see how you feel. If you like it, then keep taking it. And if it doesn't
Mm.
do anything for you, then it's not just in your head. It's probably not doing anything for you. So that's how I narrowed down all the supplements, and I tried them all. I had the Shroom Tech from On It, the Cordyceps. I thought Cordyceps was super good while I was running and stuff, but it's not a gotta have supplement for me.
Oh man, you said an interesting word, cordyceps. Did you see The Last of Us?
No, what is that?
It's this show on HBO Max, but it's based on a video game, and basically cordyceps take over. In the way it is right now, you technically as a person can't get infected with cordyceps. They can't take over your body.
Mm-hmm.
But in this world of the video game and the show, cordyceps take over. So they don't call them zombies. They don't like to, like, there was something like they were talking about when they were shooting, they weren't allowed to refer to the characters that were infected with cordyceps as zombies, but it's basically like zombie like characters that go crazy, want to eat people.
Mm.
It's pretty wild. You should check it out if you're looking for something
Well,
sci-fi to
the
watch.
supplements did not have that effect on me. The mushrooms, I was okay, and I think I'm still okay as can be.
Yeah. I had a friend in high school, and I'm assuming it's the same, but refused to eat mushrooms. He's like, no, it's a fungus. Can't do it. For me, I'm pretty open to most things. I think the one thing that I refuse to eat and try would be natto. I have tried it on
Hmm.
numerous occasions, once accidentally while in Japan, and I just doused that with shoyu. And another time, my friend had like a very healthy organic version. He's like, "Oh, you got to try this. This is the best." And both occasions did not enjoy
The
natto.
taste or the texture?
Both.
But it's supposed to be good for you.
Yeah, it's supposed to be incredibly healthy.
Yeah, fermented food.
Yeah. Have you tried
I
that?
did try it. I think Kahala, the downstairs, the more affordable brunch, they have like it's part of their buffet,
Oh wow.
and they had like packages of natto. So I just ate a bunch of them because it's part of the breakfast. But I thought it was okay, tolerable.
I don't know what it was. I think it was probably, if I had to choose between the two, more the texture than the taste. Yeah, just not for me. But that said, there's a lot of things in Japanese culture and experience that are super fascinating. And I know we talked briefly about going to Japan. What relationship do you have to Japanese culture?
I am half Japanese. I think until the age of 2, I only spoke Japanese, 2 or 3.
Wow.
I used to go because my dad was in the Navy, so he'd go on deployments. He was a pilot, fighter pilot, so he was gone for 6 months at a time. Sometimes before school, we'd just go live in Japan. So I was there all the way until about, I think, maybe 10 years old. We used to go every summer. We lived there for the summer, about 3 months at a time. So my mom is still Japanese, and I'm still half Japanese. So they're actually, my parents are in Japan right now, and they're going to come back over this way. But it's still very prevalent. My mom still has family living in Japan. So I haven't been for a while, but we have a lot of Japanese in mind.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. Wait, so where were you born?
I was actually born in California, Lemoore, California, on the Navy base. We went away for a short time to Monterey, where my brother was born, and then back to Lemoore because it was one of the few Hornet bases. So, usually in the military, you move around a lot, but because there's not a lot of Hornet bases, I stayed there until I was 16, I think, and then moved to Washington State.
I had no idea. I always thought you were born and raised here. You're very, very local.
Well, I was tutored heavily when I first got here. I was coached to fit in, and been here for since 03, so it's going well.
I can relate to that as someone who is also mixed race, but born and raised here. Definitely early on, learning to speak Pidgin to proof connection to being from here, and then over the course of my journey, learning more about different cultures, I think has been pretty cool. But that's super crazy. Even the Navy part. Actually, I don't know if we ever talked about this, but Bev's dad was in the Navy. So she was
Oh yeah.
born, yeah, she was born in Florida, and she's lived all over the world too.
Oh, nice.
So they would move every couple of years. But hearing you say about the 6 months deployment, I've heard her talk about that with her dad a number of times.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because I don't know how. I know you're into the like artsy side of life with art and photo and all that, and now video, right? But actually, the guy
Oh, not much.
when I first got here, the guy that was helping me with the local culture, we worked at the same place, and he was actually a prominent graffiti artist who is no longer with us.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh yeah, me too. But he was really good to me, and then it was funny because of course I got into my job, and he was still prominent graffiti artist, and we just both did our own things, and he's cool and I was cool, and we talked a couple of times when I was working, and wasn't like after him or anything like that. I knew what he did, and he knew what I did, and we just still had that.
Yeah, I am into the arts. It's always artistically inclined, I guess, ever since small kid time, sketching, writing. I'd sum it up as writing is my core craft, and writing has really helped me in my professional life. But over the years, I've branched out into painting and photography and minimal video editing. To be honest, it's not really my bag, but I'm working on it
Mm-hmm.
minimally. But I love photography. And something I learned from my teacher, and it's kind of similar to jujitsu in a way. Like if you find like you start hitting a plateau or something's kind of stale, try something new. So for me, my rotation is usually writing, and that is
Mm-hmm.
probably right about now, this time of year through the summer. And then photography is like year round, and then painting is usually
Mm-hmm.
in the fall through start of the spring, which I know in Hawaii we don't really have, but
Did
yeah,
you?
for sure.
It's just mental seasons, right? Just keep track of it in your head. Are you into the graffiti, or do you follow it?
I know a number of graffiti artists, and I think the style is really cool. I have myself have never tagged or anything, but definitely the talent.
It's okay. It's okay if you did. It's okay if you're a tagger.
No, I never have actually. At this stage in my life, I think I'm too old to get into it. My knees wouldn't handle running if I had to run.
I mean, personally, some of it is really nice. It's
Mm,
the just random tags. That's kind of the community doesn't really support, right? But there's actually a good space for graffiti artists right now as far as legitimacy and
mm.
giving them somewhere to work on, especially down by Kakako. I think they did a really nice job with giving them an outlet.
Yeah, I actually know Jasper and I met Kamea, who were the two behind the initial earlier, formerly Powwow but now Worldwide Walls.
Right.
Actually, Jasper just started training jujitsu. Yeah, I was just chatting with him the other day about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he lives super close to HQ too. So I sent him the schedule and told him if he ever wants to check it out, he should stop by.
Yeah, stop by.
My, at least when it comes to painting and artistic style, it's a lot more abstract.
Hmm.
So I think the only way I think very clearly is in words. And this is one of the reasons why, like, I think it's super cool what you're doing with your podcast.
Hmm.
So for the listeners, if you didn't read the description or didn't know, Chris has his own podcast, which I will put the link in the description. But in hearing how you build your podcasts, how you, even the solo casts are really mean, but you just do a really great job at telling stories. And
Oh,
so I
thanks.
think for me as a writer, I appreciate, the storytelling aspect of it.
Oh, thank you. It's just nonsense. We're just talking nonsense.
You say that, but there's structure. So that's what's really, really fascinating.
I'm gonna patent structured nonsense then.
You should, man. I can see that on a t-shirt. Like visually, that look really cool.
Structured
The
nonsense.
structured nonsense
I
approach.
changed the name of my podcast to Structured Nonsense.
In the span of time that we've been talking about podcasts, one thing I've noticed, one of the things is it's okay if you change the name. There's a number of podcasts over the course of their lifetimes and journeys that have gone through rebrands. The main thing is to get the content going, build the audience.
Mm.
Your listeners will stay with you.
Yeah, my listeners, I can't figure out. Like sometimes when you're making the podcast, you try to appeal to the listeners, but then can't really figure out who's listening. So you just make whatever you want to make, and if people want to listen, they'll listen, and if not, then they don't have to listen. You saw we had like across the world, there's like Belgium and like Asian countries and stuff like that. I have no idea why they would want to listen to it.
You never know, like who is drawn to what you do. One of my earliest endeavors as an artist, I published, well, my first book. I've actually done a number of writing projects and books and manuscripts, but years after I published it, that was in 2012, I got an email from someone in France who had read it. And then a couple years after that, I got a message from someone in India who read it.
Oh,
And,
weird.
I'm not a bestseller, I'm not known, but your work and your audience, I think if you're kind of doing it from an authentic place, your audience will find you. So just continue to just do that and cultivate that, because I think there's a need and a value for the uniqueness of each voice. One of my favorite expressions that someone shared with me, and I'll need to look it up because I can't attribute the quote properly, so I'll drop that in the description. But basically, the judge of the artist or the creator or the storyteller, it's not to judge the work, it's just to do the work.
Mm.
And the audience will be the ones that take it in.
That's very interesting. When I started doing it, I thought that if I interview somebody, all the people that know that person will want to hear about that person. But I realized a lot of people really don't care about what their friends have to say. There's only, a certain subset of the population that actually wants to sit down and listen to like a conversation. And the rest of them, they're probably not bad friends, but they don't give a shit about what you have to say.
That's true. Like I found over the years, especially with my art and my writing,
Mhm.
getting sometimes the people closest to me to consume it is like pulling teeth, whereas it's the people that are maybe kind of more
Yeah.
peripheral, acquaintances or strangers that tend to want to consume it or see it. And I think there's this quote in scripture. It has to do with the prophets. It's like the prophet is not without love save for their homeland.
Hmm.
So the idea is that, wherever you're from or wherever you are, uh, you're not going to get the recognition or the notice until later. But I don't think that's why we do it. I think we got to do it. If there's an itch, you got to scratch it and see where it leads.
Yeah, it's just, somewhere where to go. It's to do something instead of doing nothing, because we could all just sit and keep to ourselves, right? Or we can, hit record and say the things, that you just feel like saying. And if people want to hear it, then go ahead. And if they don't want to hear it, we're not chasing anybody down, like just making it to make it,
Mm.
doing something instead of nothing. And me, I'm an introvert, so I'm perfectly happy doing nothing and not talking to anybody. But I figure one of the things was like, if I make it, then I don't have to talk to people. You can just listen to it, right? Especially like on the supplements and the biohacking stuff. Now you don't have to talk to me in person. You can just listen if you want to hear it, right?
Wow, that's wild. I wouldn't have guessed that you're an introvert. Are you a pretty like clear introvert, or are you kind of more towards the middle?
I'm pretty clearly, well, it's hard because like for work, right? You can't be an introvert. You gotta fit into that role and be a personality, right? And then in my personal life, I'm not the kind of person that goes out and like wants to mingle. There was times early on in jiu-jitsu where I would get there and then I would decide like, it's too close to class time. I don't have enough time to warm up. I'm going to go home. Like going into like a group class is like way out of my comfort zone.
Interesting. And now you teach them, which is fascinating.
And now that's also, I mean, I enjoy it. It's comfortable. I love seeing everybody, and it's more like, friendship. Teaching the material is more like just putting information out to friends because of the family environment that we have, at our school and also at, the other school. But yeah, it's different. It's not like I'm going out and doing public speaking or something like that, which is also okay. I'm okay with public speaking, but it's not my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, it can definitely be interesting having to speak in the public in various sizes. In one of the many things I've done over the course of my life, I've actually was a licensed wedding officiant. I'm not currently, although it's very easy to get your license here. I remember just, it doesn't matter if there's like 5 or there's 100 people. It's always slightly nerve-wracking, especially in that beginning period.
Yeah. So I don't really do the nerves thing. So like, I know I told you recently, like I'm teaching some material to incoming personnel. When I have to teach some material, I just go, I just give the material, and it's not a problem. I guess it doesn't fall into the category of like, oh shit, I gotta speak in public. It's just putting material out there. I guess if the material is easy, then it kind of tells itself, and that's different than like, I guess, the mindset of public speaking, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Over the course of my career, I've had to do a number of trainings, and so I'm trying to relate to that. And I know when I'm training people, it's a little bit easier versus if it's something that's a little bit closer to heart. For example, when I did poetry slams, anytime I ever went up there, I couldn't feel my knees. Whereas if I'm talking to a group about something that has to do with work or principles, it's a lot easier than something more to do with art.
Some of that the vulnerability in the material, like, oh, I don't know if people are gonna like this or not.
I don't know, man. When I worked at the opera, I always told people they pay me not to sing, which is something I learned from the late great Henry Aquina, and I stuck with that as the marketing director. So I think I like being behind the camera, not necessarily in front of it. But then it's weird, right? As an artist, are you creating art to just be in a bubble and not for it to be seen? And I've gone back and forth a lot of that. And I think part of it, similar to what we talked about earlier, just creating to create. And then if the audience finds it, the audience finds it. So I think as I've gone through the journey and become more comfortable in my own skin and with what's going out there and just caring less about if it's good. One of my friends who's a tattoo artist, but also a graffiti artist, separate from my my main artist, whose name is Horiyumi Tattoo Adams here, but Marco Tattoos. Marco and I were talking one time, and Marco was telling me how, as an artist, he feels like the work is never good enough. It's never done. And certainly, especially with writing, I can look at something and I can write it and I can be done with it. A poem, for example. And in the moment, as I'm performing it or going through it, I'll ad lib and change something, because in that moment, there's a difference that I feel or see, or it just might be easy for me to kind of tweak and do a little bit differently. So I think it's recognizing. That's what's actually kind of cool about this, like once a podcast is done and it's edited, I'm not going to go back and redo it. It's done. Whereas with writing,
right,
especially now digitally, with so much of it living online, you can always go edit. With paintings, I mean, I have some paintings that aren't finished for years because they require other layers or where I'm at in a different season, how that comes forward. So I think it's a little bit of all of the above, to be honest.
So have you tried to record something where it's just you talking?
In the podcast or with other things?
Yeah, in the podcast.
I have actually. Yeah, I've done a few of those. It's super weird. There's a couple that I've shared already, and I feel like with each one I get a little bit better, and it
That's
flows.
Right. I did hear actually your the solos. I heard them. But when you recorded them, did you find yourself like, fuck, that's no good, and then delete it and then make it again, or did you just do it one crack and said, yeah, that's it?
I've never redone the whole thing. I've maybe redone parts. Like there could be something where I listen to it and I'm like, that's not quite it. Or as I'm editing and I'm taking out the filler words, just to keep it real.
Uh,
It the flow is weird. So then I'll just go and I'll look at the thought and then I'll re-record the thought and cut it in. So here and there.
okay.
But once it's out there and if I hear it and there's something that I'm like, I should have, I could have said this, I could have done that, I just let it go.
So on mine, if I record something, I'll usually record for like 2 minutes and then delete it, and then record for like 2 minutes and then delete it, and then just say fuck it, and then just record whatever it comes out, and then that's it. I just put it out.
That's
because it's never going to be the way that you want it, I think.
That's amazing, because to me yours sounds so polished. I was going to ask you, like, do you script, do you plan? And because I have ideas for, other than interviewing people, I think for solo ones there's some pretty cool ideas and thoughts to explore. But then I'm like, should I storyboard it? Should I give myself some kind of way to just kind of go? But then I'm so used to, and I feel like I speak the best when I'm just on the fly. And I'm so used to that.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I've had to do presentations, I do way better not over prepping. If I over prep, I shoot myself in the foot.
I think maybe if you just put like bullet points, like topics, like we talked about marathon, right? Or I talked about marathon. I put like marathon history and then a couple of other points. And then I just went through it as I thought about it. So kind of ad-libbing it. So I think about it for a few minutes before and like, what is it that I want to say or cover, and then just put down a couple ideas so that it stays kind of on track flowing, and then just fill in the rest.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I gotta say, the podcasting experience is pretty fun. It's fun in a different way. It's a unique challenge, and perhaps because it's new. And I think that's part of why I also enjoy practicing different forms of art. It's also why I enjoy jiu-jitsu, and it's something that I come back to. It's the variety, it's the creativity, it's learning something new, it's seeing something familiar in a whole new light. And I find that really fascinating. I think there's that quote, to be ripe is to rot. And similar to what we were chatting offline about with biohacking peaking later, I think there's a part of me that is hoping that I don't peak young. I want to peak later in life. I want to really question and challenge, what does it mean to be young? What does it mean to be healthy? Right. So I think learning and being curious is a big part of what can help us with that.
Yeah, I agree. Good point.
You got any other tips for any aspiring podcasters?
Yeah, don't worry about what you're putting out or if people are going to like it. Just if you have something you want to talk about, then just talk about it. My friend's wife was actually wanted to do like a blog, but blogs are like 15 years ago, right? Blogs. And then she thought about vlogs, and vlogs are like 10 years ago, right? Nobody likes vlogs anymore. And so the best, easiest, like it has to be easy, right? Click on it, listen, and then people will consume, right? Click, listen, and consume. And so if you have something to say or something that you're passionate about, you want to talk about, then just record it. If you like editing, have fun with the editing and just put it out there. You know what is interesting is even like real popular podcasts, like their editing isn't like heavy. It's just recorded.
That.
Yeah.
I noticed that. I remember after we talked earlier in the podcast where you had a number of us on, and it occurred to me how many filler words there were. And then as I've been going on this, being more aware of that, and then listening to other podcasts, people just go. I was listening to one podcast about Carl Jung, and I can't tell you how many so's and likes there were in just the opening monologue. It's interesting for me because sometimes I've been really guilty of writing the way that I speak. So I'm conscious of how words come together, how they flow. For me, words are like building blocks, right?
Yeah. So when we make the podcast with other people who are not regularly recording podcasts, I take out a ton of likes and so's and ands and ums because I know they're not thinking about it, right? But I think one side benefit, right, if you get nothing else out of recording podcasts, is you get better at conveying ideas through your words without so much filler. So I think it's, as I say, I think it's good for you as a person and development. It's a skill to have, and it's beneficial for you. Just like, if you go out running every day, if you're recording podcasts, then it's something that's benefiting you, and that it's helping your communication skills, and that's usable, I think, for everyday life.
Yeah, it's super practical. It's something that I've noticed in the practice of writing, photography, all of these things. They've helped me so much as a professional. It's helped me in my everyday life. I gotta say, working on even book projects, it's really allowed me to open up,
Mhm.
be more open in sharing ideas. I'm actually, when I tested, I've always tested as a clear extrovert. And the very first time I did the Myers Briggs, I was a slight E, and ever since then it's been clear E. But I'm kind of a weird extrovert. I do really enjoy seclusion. I do enjoy just not being around people. But on the
Mhm.
flip side, I also enjoy being in the middle of billions of people as well. So
I didn't know that there was
as
a
a
test for it.
yeah, you never. I thought when you told me that you're an introvert that
No.
it's called the Myers Briggs. Go look it up, Myers Briggs. You can be a. The first two times I was an ENFP, and the last time I was an ENFJ. So there's extrovert, introvert. The N is intuition. I think it's an S, which is like sensor, sensitive, sensory. E and F, feeler, and then the opposite of that is T, which is thinker, and then the P. I can't remember what the P stands for, but the J has to do with judgment.
I'm a self-diagnosed introvert.
Okay, you got to take the test and update us and see if that's actually true.
Maybe I'm masquerading as an introvert, and I'm actually a wild extrovert in denial.
You could you could also do a sorting hat quiz and figure out which house of Harry Potter that you are in.
Okay. I will. I have the website up. I'll take a look at it later on.
Yeah, Myers Briggs cool. I've taken every a couple of years. Another interesting one is the Enneagram. I actually did that for my job this past year. They had us do that, and I did it years earlier. One of my friends was super hardcore into the Enneagram. And so all these things are just tools, I think. And you could even make the argument that astrology is also a tool for you to like learn more about who you are and the energy that you're working with in this
Hmm.
body.
Okay, interesting stuff. I will definitely take a look at that.
Cool. I'm going to transition a little bit the conversation because there's some other questions that I had for you. First, what would you say is your greatest inspiration?
For a living,
Living in general. I part of that with the whole backstory is so what the underlying thread is so speak from A to Z, and for me, I think when you dive in a little bit deeper and you're looking for inspiration, it is also possible to inspire other people more. So I'm always curious, what inspires other people, and that can be anything. If it's for living, if it's something that comes to mind right off the top of my head, just whatever in this moment. Yeah, that answer.
is inspiration different than motivation?
Oh, that's a good question. I think so, actually.
Okay.
I do think so. I think inspiration is like the spark, and motivation is the follow through.
Okay. So it's kind of weird, but I guess I don't really work with either inspiration or motivation.
Wow, that's cool. Why is that?
I think because motivation comes and goes, and I think you can periodically be inspired by things, but I don't have per se anything that like continuously inspires me. I have, I guess, the general goal of like maximizing, you know, daily how you feel, what you can accomplish. But I'm not going to lose like inspiration, and I'm not going to lose motivation because, doing what I have to do is just what I have to do. It's not dependent on anything. So I know that inspiration can definitely add to, your drive as a person, but I just have the way that I want to be, and it's not dependent on inspiration or motivation, for better or worse.
That actually sounds like a very liberated way to operate and flow through life.
I'm definitely floating, not flowing.
Floating? What's the difference between floating and flowing?
I take whatever comes, You never know what it's going to be. You know, everybody has the potential to have 1 minute your life is totally fine, and in 1 second later your world is totally different or changed or destroyed. And so you just got to be willing to kind of move forward and go through whatever comes your way. And I think that's probably from work to have that mindset, because you see so many things change in just a second.
Hmm. Do you think your view and who you are has shifted over the years since you've been doing the job that you do?
I think definitely I tell the incoming guys that, in 6 months you will leave as a different person than when you got here. Throughout your work, you, I think, become a bit of a different person. And that's why the relationships that you've had prior, some of them don't survive that change. It's a definite changes the way that you think about life. The prevailing thought for me is that throughout life, people are so willing to waste so much time arguing and being unhappy. And if people would just realize that that's a waste of time to argue over parking stalls, over things that you disagree or you want to be right about. Like, it's just a waste of time. You have so much more opportunity if you just prioritize, what is important, and you'll find that you probably just waste a lot of time on stuff that's not important.
That's really cool. I found through conversations with people who have worked in frontline service oriented positions, law enforcement, fire department, emergency medical services, the view on life is it's definitely different than what you might encounter in an arts organization,
Mm-hmm.
but I appreciate it because it feels like it's more grounded and more honest. I've noticed a lot of people who kind of float in the clouds, and at different chapters of my life, I would say I probably did as well. And through experiencing the many forms of loss in life and grief that comes with that, it changes you. And I think when your job is constantly throwing that and other forms of trauma in your face, you have a choice, right? You can be hardened by it, or you can shift and evolve and find ways to move forward as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty cool. That's in a way, I think what you described, it answers my earlier inspiration question, but in the sense of a lot of times I think inspiration can lead us to these ahas,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe you're not doing it for inspiration or motivation, but what you've experienced has given you a very valuable aha, and it's one certainly I think about, just in the fact that none of us know how much time we have. There's always an expiration date. So what are you doing with that time, and how are you using that time? How are you investing and spending that time?
Right. Yeah. I think that's pretty much it. I think as far as inspiration, motivation, I just have a clear view of what's important to me, and I think that I'm right, as far as what is important, and I don't think that most of the people realize what is actually important. That's why they're so willing to waste this time. Every work shift, the majority of the calls that I go to is arguments. Argument, family argument, homeless people arguing, people arguing. There's arguments like dozens of times per day, and people are arguing. Sometimes what it takes is for us to go and tell them, hey, you guys need to quit arguing, and that's good enough. And then, of course, sometimes there's disaster consequences for arguments, right, that escalate to a degree that people were not expecting. Other than that, like, I think just people just argue in general way too much.
I would agree. I wouldn't argue that statement.
You want to argue about it? There's some things that you
No,
can
not at all.
argue. There's some things that you can argue, right, that are just sharing your point of view and maybe disagree. Like, a disagreement is maybe worthwhile, right? But in a random argument, like, how often does the argument end in a parking lot with the other person saying, you know what, you made a good point. I concede. You were correct.
It's really rare, and I've I've always been able to be calm in the face of adversity. Yeah, like throughout my life, my mom. There was one time where this isn't necessarily adversity, but it's a very extreme experience. We were at a gas station and we're standing there, and someone was filling their bike tire with air, and it just exploded next to us, and I didn't flinch, I didn't move, and my mom jumped, and she's like, "Oh, your nerves." And then as I went through life and college, mediating, I worked in student housing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things I got called to, and just finding ways to diffuse. There was times where dealing with attempted suicides and different things, and I was always very calm. And I think I came from the standpoint of like, I don't want anyone to like lose their life or deal with fire, flood, or blood, right? And I was always calm in that. But then when I walked away and had to deal with whatever it was that I had to deal with, and that's where other things started to come up, and I wasn't as calm. And as I've expanded through life, it's how do I take that sense of calm and that spirit and just make that flow into all the different facets and the parts. It's been an interesting unfolding. It's one that's not perfect, but I find myself continually coming back to a space of just gratitude for whatever it is that life throws me. And certainly I'm human. I mentioned earlier briefly, I got kneed in the face. I wasn't super stoked on that last night, but I wasn't going to go and, make a deal out of it. It is what it is. It happens. I've also kneed people in the face, when I was there, and there's a chance that I could do it again too at this space. Like, it happens, right? What life teaches you when you start dealing with adversity and stop fighting it, allowing it to be. I'll use a jiu-jitsu analogy. If you're getting smashed and you're fighting getting smashed and you're spazzing out, you're going to end up in an even worse submission or position, possibly a submission. So the best thing you can do is just breathe and calm down, and then get your bearings and find your way out of it. And that's something that, as life has continued to smash me, because life doesn't stop smashing you. Like, there's always a new challenge. There's always a new frustration. And then beyond even challenges or frustration, I think about it from the standpoint of, there's people in my life that I love that I'm probably going to lose.
Yeah.
And what is that like? And having lived through that and experienced that, I know it's not fun. It's not great.
It's gonna suck.
But there's beauty in it too. Yeah.
It's gonna suck. Sometimes
It does.
sometimes makes you wonder, what is the point? We just continually deal with loss and trauma, and what is the point? But the point is the day-to-day, how we're living the life, I guess.
Yeah. I don't think I really know what the answer is, but I know that I have much more enjoyment today than when I was younger. I talked about this on one of the previous podcasts, and I've talked about it in passing. I don't know if you and I have ever really talked about it, but I know earlier in my life, I would look at the weekend and I'd be stoked when it was Friday. I'd enjoy part of Saturday. And I'm just using, if it was a Friday, Saturday, back to back kind of analogy, right? As soon as Sunday came, I'm like, oh, shoot, I got to go back to work. I'd be anxiety, stressed out, frustrated, whatever. If it was just split days, then that was even more stressful. And then as I've gotten older, as I've had more experience, and just really start putting down a lot of the BS that I carried or I bought into, I think I've been able to, similar to that point about the calmness, expand that into more of whatever it is. I like what you're saying. The point is to just be. Is if you do that, actually, it's a really Zen, mindful way of approaching it. You're just kind of where you are.
Yeah, that's a Zen study. I'm no Zen expert or example, but I did a lot of studying about the moment, right? Being in the moment and just being thankful in the moment. Like, if we're sitting here and nobody's back is hurting, like, that's something to be thankful for. If your nose is not stuffed up, if your throat is not sore, should be thankful for that. Enjoy this moment of like, things are good, right? Because in the next 5 seconds you can get a phone call that changes your life. And if you missed out on enjoying those moments that were available to you, then you're going to be kicking yourself that you wasted that time.
100%. You ever heard of Joseph Campbell?
No, I don't know as much stuff as you.
I think you do. It's just there's different things. There's still intersection points. You probably know a lot more than I do. But Joseph Campbell, he was a comparative mythologist, and he ended up actually passing away here on Oahu. I'm not sure if she's still alive, but his wife lived after he passed away here as well. But Joseph Campbell, I remember reading one of his writings, and he was talking about how he found, by really investing and being present in the moment, like, he could be in a waiting room and get so immersed in the waiting room and looking at the patterns on the walls, or if there was no patterns, looking at the cracks on the floor, whatever it is, and be so fascinated in that and be so present that he just would be just down, and before he knew it, boom, time had passed. And so that's something that after reading that, I really think about, because how much time do we really have? None of us know. Don't take that gift for granted.
I'm not bothered by waiting rooms. I'm not bothered by having to sit and wait. I kind of do the same thing where I can just sit and enjoy that nothing is happening and you're just there, right? It's nothing to be upset about. Traffic is the same way. People get so upset about like being stuck in traffic, and I get upset sometimes too. But if you think about it, you're sitting in a car that's probably all right, and your climate is probably all right, and you can have the world of music at your fingertips or podcasts, right? So you're entertained, and you're just mad that you're not where you want to be at the moment you want to be there. So we get upset, right? But there's nothing you can do about it. You just got to go through it.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I like what you said about the car, because that made me think for a moment. The vast majority of the miserable people, and this is an opinion, so I don't have any science to back this up, but in my opinion, the vast majority of the miserable people, if you think about it, they're still far wealthier than the vast majority of human history and where people have been, and a large amount of the world's populace. So when you start to kind of think about it that way, I remember this one time, I was real frustrated. My car broke down. I had to take the bus from the windward side where I was living at the time, and I was not in the greatest relationship at the time, so I was probably lamenting over that. And I was thinking about work and all of the above. And I looked out the window and I saw a guy, and he literally had one leg and he was on crutches.
Mm-hmm.
And he was going up the side of the poly with his one leg on his crutches. And I remember thinking, like, man, it's so true. It can always be worse. Yeah. So what? It could be better, but the reality is it could also be worse. So as long as you wake up, got breath, like what you said earlier, if your back's not hurting, those are all things to be super stoked and grateful for.
It's a relative misery, right?
Oh, that's a good phrase too. Relative misery. It sounds like a rock band, actually.
Yeah.
Relative misery. I can picture the posters in my head.
You know, I know it's your podcast, but I wanted to ask you, being on the artist side and knowing that many artists eventually lose their shit, are you worried about that? Concerned?
For me?
Yeah.
Am I gonna lose my shit?
Yeah, because
that's an interesting question.
You lose your mind at some point, do you think?
At some point, or at some point again? I mean, like, depending on how you define it, right? As I've gone on this journey, and I'm also a very spiritual person, right? And I've had some pretty interesting experiences, bordering on the metaphysical, supernatural, and at times when I've gone through it, I felt like it's really unexplained. I couldn't process it. But then I'll encounter someone like my teacher who has had similar experiences, and I don't even have to say much, but it feels like, oh, there's someone out there that gets it. Like, I'm not crazy. I'm not losing my mind. But then I'm a big believer that therapy can be useful.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen therapists throughout my adult life, and I'm still talking to my current therapist, and I really enjoy that. I think I've been able to kind of go even deeper and focus and look at different forms of healing. Maybe it's not lose my mind or lose my shit, but it's more like not be at ease with the unease. So in 2019, I was journaling, and I remember writing this line: I'm at ease with my unease until I am not. And I remember writing it, and I remember the act of it going and being written in my journal and seeing the pen. And it was like a very present but also outer body kind of experience. And then I remember thinking, like, oh, what does that actually mean? Like, what is that if not? And I think that, or when not, and I think that that is possible. You can eventually get to a place where that when not could be occur. And what I learned from it was it's okay for me to ask for help. And in the process of going through that and just trying to better understand, and I think for me, something my dad talked about: do your best. Some days your best is going to be better than others, but as long as you're doing your best. So there's times in my life where I realized, like, okay, I could be doing more, but am I doing the best that I can in this moment with whatever I got going on? Sure, I can be at ease. Where the unease creeps in, I think it's where I stop taking care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not getting good sleep. I'm not eating great. I'm not really a big drinker, especially at this stage of my life, so I don't worry so much about that aspect of it. But I do notice that it's almost like a domino effect. Things can trigger and can take me out of being out of really good creative spaces, can take me out of healthy headspaces. Those negative intrusive thoughts. And I think something I realized too is, thoughts come and go. You don't have to be attached to those either.
Mm-hmm.
So really, as I've gone on this journey, as I've explored how I feel through different seasons of loss, I'm just doing my best to be a healthier person. I don't worry about it. If it happens, then that's probably where I'm meant to walk through. But I'm really just focused more on all right, what do I do at this time? And what do I do at this time to create an impact in the world? Hopefully make the communities that I'm a part of healthier in some way. Because right and wrong, certainly similar. You said something earlier because you believe you're right. And I'm sure there's things where I believe I'm right. But people, I think a lot of times where you end up having these arguments too, it's because you have right meeting right. And who's to say that one is more right than the other right? What I like to think about is what's actually healthy. And maybe the healthy route would be to stop yelling at the other person to prove a point, to accept that, hey, we're not going to agree. So I don't need to yell. I don't need to expend that
So
energy.
the problem is, though, it feels good to like just yell, right? That's where everybody gets stuck.
I've been fortunate to walk away from situations like that, although I have had my literal hitting of the head kind of moments. My ex, she was yelling at me one time, and I literally headbutted my head against the wall. Like it was like literally and figuratively that I needed to kind of have that observation, and it was not pleasant. So to go back to your earlier question, I guess honestly, I felt so much fear for a lot of different reasons and experiences growing up that at this stage, I don't want to live there. So I'm not afraid about what could show up. I'm just trying to do my best to do my best, but also just be healthy. Because I think that if I do that, then I'll be able to add more value wherever I am.
You won't end up cutting off your own ear or something like that. Also,
Yeah, I don't know why he went that route. That's certainly not one that I would choose. And then fortunately, we live in a time though with Photoshop and AI that you can probably just type a few keys, and if I wanted to see what that looks like, it could be manifested within seconds, if not minutes.
right?
Well, we're coming up on about an hour. Was there anything else you wanted to add or share?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I do have another question. You've talked a little bit about your job, but would you like to share with the audience what it is that you do?
Yeah, I work for the police department. I was patrolling for 18 years, and recently it's become a side gig, and I'm doing my 40 hours at training now, which is, it's different.
Well, first, mahalo for your service. On a personal level, I have a lot of reverence for those who, I mean, every day you wake up, you're basically putting your life on the line, even in what you're doing now. Something could happen. You could have a knucklehead who's not listening, and you could get severely hurt, and your livelihood or your health could be impacted, right? And then when you're doing the patrolling, but my dad was a long time HPD member before moving over to the state and was a state investigator. And then my uncle was a career HPD, and then he ended up actually at the training academy when he wrapped up. So first of all, yeah, thank you. I think it's super cool, and I know in recent years people have had all kinds of feelings. So I guess a question I have would be, what would you like people to know about your law enforcement professionals?
For the guys that are out there, I think people, the most complaining you get, like the people that hate the police the most, seem to be the people that are getting tickets. Nobody likes getting tickets because there's fines attached to them, and you find a lot of the negative comments are related to traffic enforcement. But if you don't do traffic enforcement, then people will just go nuts. They'll just be super dangerous because whatever everybody is doing in that moment whatever they're doing is more important than what everybody else is doing. So if I need to get through that yellow, I'm going, because what I'm doing is more important than what everybody else is doing. But the police step in where the safety is more important, and maybe you shouldn't run that, yellow. So traffic enforcement is one thing. If you think about it, if you have complaints about the police department, think about if it's related to getting a ticket, and then maybe fix your driving, and that'll solve your issue, right? And then for secondly, the policemen that are going to the calls, they don't have any agendas. They're not trying to get stats. They're not trying to arrest people for certain things. They're just going to service the call, to come to a fair solution for whatever the case is, and they're just there to enforce. If there's been a violation of law and somebody wants to prosecute, then they're just the middleman on the enforcement scale, and the real judgment is at court, right? Everybody has that day in court, right? So they're not there like just driving around looking to bust people for stuff. They're just regular people just going through a work day. I think that's maybe something that people don't realize. Like, fix your driving, and you shouldn't have any troubles with that. And then as far as if the police are in contact with you, then they're either addressing something, or they're trying to take care of an issue that's been brought up. A lot of it is complaint based, like if whatever the public is complaining about, and that can be traffic too.
Mm.
But if, why are the police doing this? Why are they doing that? A lot of it is complaint driven. Whatever the hot topic is that people are complaining about, that's usually where you're going to get some type of a response, because that's what is expected, right? That the police are going to do something about it.
Do you have any like favorite memories or highlights of your career that you'd want to share?
A lot of people ask, like, what's the best, or, best memory or anything like that. I don't have any, because every time something interesting happens, I think like, oh, that's the coolest thing that's happened. And then something else happens and I decide that's the coolest thing that happens. And now I don't have any memories of what is the coolest thing that has happened, or the best thing. It's all been good. Just going to work every day and trying to be fair, and just take care of giving people what they expect out of, when they call the police. That's what I try and do. Sometimes just because the solution is not what you want, it doesn't mean it's not fair. A lot of people think, that their way, they should get their way, but they really try and be a neutral middleman for resolving issues.
I used to talk to my dad and ask him, questions, or if he'd write things down. And at one point, I even gave him a recorder too, because when he would tell the stories, they would just kind of come and go. So as you're talking about, if there's any one, or what's cool, it sounds like, from what I know from talking to people like yourself, my dad, my uncle, yeah, it's definitely quite the career and quite the experience, full of many micro experiences along the way. Even as I'm telling you that, I can picture like at least 5 or 6 different stories that my dad told me over the years. And at one point, he and my uncle were actually beat partners too on the windward side.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing the story from the 2 different perspectives was always super trippy too.
there's always, funny stories. You always have front row seats to whatever madness or nonsense is going on. But there it's always different themes, right? It's usually funny, usually something that you find entertaining. But on the other side of that too, there's a lot of not good stuff that we tend to not, incorporate into stories as much.
How do you, when you got to deal with those not good things? And I guess this has been my last question. What tips do you have for people when they're dealing with not good things to let it go? Does it relate back to what you said about time, or is there something else?
So I think about this a lot when people die. And there's I think the hardest thing for me was dealing with the people that are still alive that are affected by that. So that was a skill that I think I really worked on. But my observation of that is that bad feeling that they have is that their normal has been shattered. It's been disrupted. And the not good feeling they have is trying to get back to that feeling of normal. And the
Mm.
struggle is that it doesn't feel good. You want to get back to normal and you want it to happen right now. And that's where people fall apart. So whenever something happens, you can't beat time as a fixer, as a healer, and you just got to realize that you're not going to feel normal, and that's okay. And even people that have dealt with worse things than I've dealt with, uh, they still don't feel good about it. And I've had those conversations with those people, and just tell them like it's okay to not be okay. You may never get back to where you were before. You may never feel normal or good about it, but you got to learn to live with that and find some kind of new normal. So, um, you know, don't be in a rush when bad shit happens. You just got to take it for what it is. You can only do what you can do in that moment, and the rest of it just takes time. That's all it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, something my teacher told me, whatever step you take is the step that you take. And so if you were to do this exercise where you stand up and you fall forward, you're going to catch yourself or you're going to fall flat on your face. But whatever, if you take your left foot first, and then that's the right step. If it's your right foot, that's the right step. Similar with the choices when we're dealing with different things. And hopefully we learn to breathe and slow down. And honestly, I do credit jujitsu for that. Like all the many years of getting crushed by people and just learning to breathe and really be calm. Sometimes too, it's just because I've had some huge gaps in mat time and it's just, I don't have cardio anymore and it sucks. So there's also that too. But what you're saying as well, yeah, I know after my dad passed, something that Bev shared with me was the grief itself never actually goes away. You just grow around it. So as you were describing the new normal, that's what made me think about, because there'll be random moments where I'll think about my dad and I'll be a wreck, and then there'll be other times where it's kind of like, oh yeah, life is pretty amazing, it's pretty beautiful, even though I'm living with this different, or this void of something that's very different. So it's a very unique journey that we find ourselves on. I think one of the big things is just not to judge, So as you're talking about, be fair. Try to find that middle. I think that middle is really important in life.
Yeah, nothing good happens in panic, right? So that translates both from jujitsu all the way across life.
Mm.
Every good thing that happens is usually in calm, or as calm as you can be, and panicking is not usually productive, right?
Mm. 100%. Well, do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up?
Um, I didn't get the answers to this test beforehand, so I didn't really think about closing thoughts. I just found out that this was about me, seconds before we started recording. I don't know what I thought we were going to talk about. I thought we were going to talk about podcasting or something, maybe.
We did, actually.
Oh, yeah, I guess we did. Um, you know, my closing thought is to do something productive. So I've said this before on my own podcast, but every day that you go through, you're either getting better or you're getting worse, right? You're either gonna eat that bar of chocolate or you're gonna go get some exercise, and the negative effects stack up and the positive effects also stack up. So we're in a we're in an instant gratification society, and just because you're not getting immediate results, stick with it. If it's good for you, do good things, take your supplements that you enjoy, try something out that you think might be good for you, and just do something productive, and take care of yourself. Spend less time arguing.
Right on. Well, first of all, mahalo. Really appreciate it. Getting to learn more about you. There's things that I learned, which is super awesome. And I think every person offers a unique perspective, and knowing the kind of work that you do, the things you've had to deal with. I think people, if they take the time to kind of listen, it can be very illuminating. Where can people find you in your podcast?
Oh yes, there's a page on Instagram for now, but you can search for it. You can search for the podcast. It's on all the platforms. The host site is rss.com. They've been great. Which
Well,
host?
I'll link it as well.
Okay, which host site are you using?
I'm using Podcasto, which is actually the studio in right now, and so far I really enjoy it. And I think part of that was because I needed just to get going, and it was the easiest one for me to figure out. I might change at some point, but so far I've been pretty happy.
So I started out on Buzzsprout because I think it was free, and so Buzzsprout is a good place to try it out. They give you limited recording hours and stuff like that, and they only hold on to your episodes for I think 3 months at a time. I could be wrong, could be more. And then they give you notice that they're going to delete your episode and stuff. But their page is beautiful. The stat tracking is super nice. I just got a really good deal from rss.com, so I decided to try it out, and it's been good. They all work pretty much the same way. So if you want to get started podcasting, sharing your thoughts, just do it. And if nobody listens, then so what?
And Chris actually has a podcast about podcasts, so I will link that as well, so you can check that out. But definitely, I 100% recommend giving it a try. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your instruction on the mats. You're one of the professors that I think has really helped me see and understand jiu-jitsu differently, which I really appreciate. And it's also added, I think, a new spark of curiosity in exploring the art. I started in 2008, right? And then I stopped training in 2011, went back in 2016. And, with the exception of the pandemic and, after my dad passed, having some time off from there, I've been going consistently. Now I've had gaps for various reasons, injury, life, whatever, but I still go back more so than that 5-year period that I had where I was off the mats. But I do credit our academy, but definitely I appreciate your instruction. So if you're looking for some great jiu-jitsu instruction, you can find Professor Chris at CJJF
HQ
headquarters on Fridays.
Yeah.
But also where else?
For now, Central, CJJF Central. Mondays for sure. Sometimes Wednesdays, but Thursdays also for no-gi. And sometimes I get held up at work, but usually Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Central. And then they had a Leeward open up, so I got to go check that out too. I probably won't be teaching there, but I'll go check it out for sure.
I was just to say, bro, watch, you're gonna get looped in for a class for there at some point.
Just trying to help out. It's because of Fireman John. That's why soon to be hopefully Fireman John.
I didn't know he was going for the HFD. That's cool.
He's about halfway through, so
wow. Right on. Well, thank you. I'm gonna put all the links in there, and until the next time.
All right, sounds good. See you Friday. If not, then
all right, shoots. Okay.